Hello, hello. Happy Thursday. Happy Halloween for those of you who celebrate. I know it's a fun day for parents who have kids or for those of us who just enjoy dressing up. And I wanted to talk a little bit today about some things that I see happening quite often when I'm working with clients and questions that are emerging. I think especially in today's market, we're trying to figure out how do we continue to grow, and we're not really sure how to put some structure around our growth, especially in ways that can feel manageable. Excuse me. Because we have time constraints, we have commitments, we have priorities that we're facing. And so, how is it that we then can fit in additional personal development and growth, as well as put it into a context that feels like we're making progress? And so development, I wanted to say, is really multifaceted. Sometimes we can look at it and think, okay, I need to know all of these extra things as a leader, especially if we're new leaders. We can start to question what types of skills should we be focusing on? And it can get very, very muddy at times because it's not clear to us. And we're heading in all of these different directions. Should it be focusing on my team? Should it be focusing on my executive presence? Should it be focusing on time management, negotiation? What are the different things that I should be considering? And when we put ourselves into this type of a state, we can then become very overwhelmed, confused, we lack clarity. And overall, what happens is a lot of nothing. We don't really do the work that we're supposed to be doing or that we feel like we should be doing because it's just feeling like too much and we don't have a direction, which is what I wanted to talk about, because I notice that sometimes when people are starting to move up in their careers or they're going further down their leadership trajectory, if they don't have clarity around those areas that they really want to dive deeper into, it can start to become challenging. And it can feel like either you need to figure out how do you start learning skills that you don't know, and it's hard to know what's a weakness and what's a strength. So, what are some of the things that we have to do? We have to figure out, number one, what is it that we double down on to get the results so that we can improve? What awareness do we need to have within ourselves so that we know, is this worth exploring, or is this something that we need to then seek additional support around? And how do we put this into a context that we can be working on this actively on a daily basis? Because it's one thing to go through, say, a leadership development program or a training program, and it's another thing to actually put in the work. And some of you might know what I'm talking about because we not always, we might be learning textbook wise, but we're not putting it into application. And without application, we're missing out on some of the larger pieces. So first of all, there's this idea that that when we're thinking about leadership development or focus areas, that we just have to pick like maybe one or two areas and then we just go about it from that perspective. And so sometimes when I'm working with people, they're coming in and they have some clarity around what it is that they want to do. They want to focus on either presentation or communication or strategy. But then it falls a little bit flat because they're not exactly sure how to tie that back to a larger goal. So they feel like they've heard maybe that they need to work on their communication abilities or their ability to give presentations, but they don't have much context in relation to where it is that they're struggling, number one, and how it ties back to something larger, which is where it becomes this multifaceted approach to leadership development, to coaching, and to how we really truly move the needle for you. Because if we're only looking at, I need to improve my communication skills, well, in what context? And how is this going to drive you forward and create or connect the dots for you mentally so that when you're really looking to create instrumental change from within, you have a marker? Some of the various things that we can think about when we are wanting to develop is we can think about how we break it down, developing ourselves, developing the business, and developing how we lead others. And so if we're continually looking and flowing between these three areas, we can start to see how, number one, they start to move together. When we become better at developing ourselves, we in turn can be better at leading others. We also can then show up in how we're building the business case to a greater extent and thinking about our executive presence. So if we're isolating it too much, it starts to become out of context. It's disjointed. But if we become overwhelmed, where we don't have ideas on what it is that we're supposed to be doing, and we're not very clear on what our goals are, then we don't know how to focus. And so that it's kind of this double bind that we start to experience. So if we're thinking about what those goals are for ourselves, but breaking it down for developing ourselves, here's a couple of things that you can consider. You can be considering managing your career, your integrity, how you do present effectively, your stress management, your time, how you manage your time effectively, your communication through writing. These are all things that we can start to consider as like, okay, well, in what context do these aspects impact my role? In what aspects do I need these things for my role in a greater way? Similarly, with developing the business, we can think about, okay, so there's building the business case, but there's also, managing change, understanding the customer, making decisions, setting goals. Sometimes goal setting in and of itself is a skill, right? Fostering innovation, implementing it, negotiating, measuring performance, projects, thinking strategically, executing on strategy. And then if we're thinking about how we lead others, then we can start thinking about, okay, I need to, maybe I need to work as on my coaching skills, how I lead my team, how do I delegate, how do I continue to develop my employees, conflict, how do I tolerate conflict or work with conflict, manage it, fostering diversity, collaboration, hiring the right people, motivating our teams, managing meetings, assessing performance, influencing, supporting employees, fostering teams. We look at this giant list, and there's no way that we can tackle all of these in any amount of time, any, constructive amount of time, which is why it's important that we first consider what our goals are. What is it that we're hoping to achieve? It doesn't always have to be a title. It can be something along the lines of, contributing to the organization in a very specific way, being able to influence decision-making in a greater capacity, leveraging certain skills that you might have that that you excel in and you want to work on even more. There's a number of ways that you can start to think about this so that you are effective within your leadership. And so what you're going to want to do is first have those goals that are set for yourself. Thinking strategically, building the business case. What does this look like for you? It doesn't always mean that I want to move up to a VP level. It can mean that I want to move to another role or lead my team more effectively in such a way that it's, that these things then tie back to that. So what does that look like? And so then you can start adopting these different focus areas in relation to that larger goal. When I'm working with clients and as a coach, this is so incredibly important because if we're only coming in and we're looking at it from a very narrow focus, we're not going to be able to then attach it to that bigger piece. And if we're looking at everything, we're not going to be able to tackle that in a shorter amount of time. And so we have to be very specific and distinct with how we want to start approaching these things. And so what are ways that we can start to do this? How do we start to break this down for ourselves when we're feeling like maybe there's like 100 different things that we're supposed to be working on, but we don't know which one is the greatest priority at this time? So number one is really focus on your strengths. Write down and start listing out what are those pieces of yourselves that you truly bring to the table. Sometimes when I'm working with clients, like, well, it's nice to focus on my strengths, but I need to know my weaknesses. I need to focus on all the areas that I don't know. But when we can focus on our strengths first and we can understand ourselves best, Now we know how to apply ourselves. Now we know, okay, these are the things that I can bring to the table. These are things that I can double down on. And you can start to analyze, how have these things shifted or shaped the trajectory of my career so far, which gives us an insight into where we can start taking ourselves, taking our teams, taking our company. And so having real clarity and ownership of those strengths is incredibly valuable. At the same time, we can also get feedback. We can get feedback in one-on-ones with, say, our supervisors, with colleagues, with our direct reports. Start to ask those questions of how we can continually improve, how we support, how do we show up, what are things that they notice about us that are beneficial, that are positives, and what are opportunities for some growth? What are some areas that may have had some sticky points? And the more that we can become open to that type of feedback, the more that we can start to understand ourselves and what some of those areas of focus should be for right now, and how that then leads into the future, how that then leads back into where we're wanting to head within our careers. You could take it a step further and see if your organization offers a 360 review, where you're then sending out an anonymous survey to your manager, to several colleagues, to several direct reports, to different people within your organization, people that you get along with and people that you may not, people that you might have, distinct oppositional views, so that you have a well-rounded perspective and have someone that you can work with that can go through that with you. And then oftentimes taking a strengths assessment. There's numerous assessments out there. There's DISC, there's Hogan, right? There's Clifton Strengths. There's a number of ways that we can start to learn more about ourselves and then to cross-analyze. I, for one, use Principles U quite often because I just enjoy how that brings greater insights for my clients in relation to not only their strengths, but their weaknesses. It's based on the Big Five Personality Index. And we can start to break down what those traits and facets are. And we can look at it from different angles so that they can truly know, that's right, this is a true strength of mine. And this one may not be. And so then what do we do about that? Is it something to continue to build upon and stretch ourselves in smaller ways? Or is it something that we need to then gain greater support around or delegate around, lean into other people for? What does that look like? And then again, reestablish, re-identify your goals in relation to what you continue to learn about yourself. Always thinking about what's next. What's the next thing that I should be focusing on? And do this for yourself if you want to think about it and doing it in sprints or 90-day cycles. There's a book called The 12-Week Year, which can be really helpful for businesses, but it can be helpful for individuals who are wanting to set very specific goals for themselves that are very structured, but also not overwhelming. And it's not put into a SMART goal format where it feels like it has to, fit this very rigid criteria. And then start asking yourselves those deeper questions. Start digging deep into where you want to see yourself growing. Where do you want to see yourself being influential? Where do you want to see yourself operating and motivating in and around? Because when you can start to look at yourself from all these different angles, all of the rest of those pieces that I just listed earlier become clearer. They start to make more sense. And we can start to see how they intertwine and intermingle together. So rather than coming and saying that I need to work on this, we can see, how does this tie back to this? And how does this support this? And so really, it could be that some of the things that we're focusing on, or that you're focusing on, is, how do you bring in greater strategic thinking and negotiation and building the business case into a presentation so that it is the most compelling way that you can bring it and present it? How do we start bringing different aspects of ourselves into conversations, into meetings, so that it feels aligned and authentic? But first, we have to start breaking it down and understanding ourselves to such an extent where it doesn't become this hypothetical. It isn't, what type of leadership skills should I be knowing? What is it that I need to work on more to be a more effective leader? What it is who am I as a person? What do I bring to the table that is an asset? And then how do I continue to evolve as a person in this role? It's very nuanced. It's about refining ourselves. It's about honing ourselves. It's not only just about, okay, how do I learn how to have gravitas and executive presence, but how do you have it for you? Because gravitas and executive presence is different for every individual. It's what they bring. And for lack of a better word, it's their secret sauce. I actually don't like saying that, but it's just what comes to mind right now. And I think it makes sense in this context. So it's what you bring. That's what is important. And then think about who you want to work with, whether it be a coach, a mentor, someone that you can start knowing yourself with so well that you can say, okay, now we're going to refine these pieces. These are the scenarios that are coming up for me. These are the little pieces that I want to continue to work on. You've done some of the work already to kind of narrow it down. You know yourself well enough to say, yeah, I didn't show up the way that I wanted to in this case. I felt like for some reason I didn't want to bother them too much. I felt like I needed to have all of the answers. I felt something so that we can then start to work through what are those blocks that are coming up for you? How do we bring and inspire greater motivation to our team? How do we let go of that need and that feeling that we have to know everything? How do we lead through ambiguity and uncertainty so that we can get into some of these bigger and deeper topics, such as VUCA or Kinefin, and different frameworks that leaders use so they're continuing to excel in their organizations and leading their companies? But it first starts with us. It first starts with us understanding what are those nuanced areas that we need to focus on, but how do they relate back to the greater context of our goals and what it is that they were hoping to accomplish, not only within our careers, but within our companies, with our teams, and how we give back in a greater way. We have to know ourselves first, and we can't think in just hypotheticals. It's not a textbook. It's not just a class. You will glean information from that, but then it's how do you specifically apply it? Because there isn't a cookie cutter approach to leadership. If this is interesting to you and you'd like to know more how you can really refine some of this down and then start to work on some of those greater pieces, I'd love to chat with you, talk with you about that. It can feel overwhelming and daunting at times when we're considering all of the various pieces of ourselves and all of the things that we have to do and all of the responsibilities and priorities that we're managing in our teams and the various aspects that are required of us. And that's why working with someone else can really help to zero in, create clarity, and really bottom line your results so that you are making progress faster and quicker without feeling like you're just bouncing from one thing to the next. And if you're curious about hearing more about how you can work with me too, I'd love to have a conversation with you. That's just a conversation. If you want to know how we can work together, I have several programs that I work with people at. I have Leader to Legacy. That's more for leaders who are really wanting and they're ready to develop their signature brand, their leadership brand, and really what that looks like for them uniquely. We have Legacy Creator. It's on a smaller scale. We're focused more on some of those leadership topics and how that relates back to their personal brand. There's Leadership Trailblazer. This is more specific to leadership skills for emerging leaders who are really coming in. And then on the corporate side, I have the Ascent programs where I work with emerging leaders, seasoned executives, and corporate teams to create more synergy within the organization. There are numerous ways that you can continue to grow in your career, in your trajectory, in your leadership, and move in a direction that feels aligned for you. Because above all, when it comes, it's all said and done, when it comes down to it, it's not so much the title. It's how you can show up within the role and feel like you are yourself. It's meaningful, it's fulfilling, you feel accomplished, and you're doing work that excites you. And so when we know ourselves and we can work on these pieces, that's how we move into the roles that are best suited for us. All right, thanks so much for joining me today. I'd love to hear your insights. What stood out for you? What questions might come up for you? Is this something that you have experienced for yourself, where you've experienced maybe some self-doubt, some uncertainty, and not even knowing where to begin because it's so many vast topics around leadership development and personal growth? All right. I'd love to hear from you. Thank